Hi, I'm Josie Jaffrey, author of the Solis Invicti series, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic paranormal romance series with vampires and zombies in it. And today I want to talk to you about the origins of that series and how it grew from those origins and developed into the 4-book series that it eventually became. So I've always been a massive paranormal romance fan with a preference for vampires, so I knew I wanted to write something in that sort of area. And I first had the sort of beginnings of the story, I think in about 2010. So 4 years before I actually started writing the first book in the Solis Invicti series, A Bargain in Silver. And it started out as a sort of novel, although I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of pacing, in terms of the story arc, and I ended up with a Word document on my computer that had, I think, about 4 separate scenes that were not necessarily particularly well connected, where there wasn't very much of a story, and to be honest, I think it was probably pretty embarrassing. Thankfully, my past self in about 2011, I think, deleted the entire thing from my computer and deleted it from all of my backups, so I don't have the luxury of looking back on those terrible first attempts to write a novel and cringing horribly. So I have to say I'm quite grateful to past Josie. Thank you very much, past Josie, for saving me that awful pain. But from that weird, I'm sure extremely embarrassing story, which, as I recall, involved one scene where she got to wear a burgundy dress, and the reason why I remember the dress is that I thought that that would be the most gorgeous dress in the world and wanted to have that dress made for me. And so I think basically about half of the manuscript that I have deleted and lost was an ode to my perfect ball gown, which is an interesting way to approach writing a novel, I'm sure you'll agree. But anyway, from this odd beginning became a graphic novel. Or at least the beginnings of a graphic novel. I got about 7 pages in, which is not very much, but those of you who draw will know that it takes about 24 hours to do 1 page. So it was quite a big undertaking. I think I was only doing it for about 2 weeks before I gave up, because it was just too much work. And looking back, I think I can see now that my ambition slightly exceeded my talent, certainly as far as the drawing went. So I want to share some of those slightly embarrassing drawings with you and explain how the characters who are in that initial graphic novel then turned into the Solis Invicti series. So, I had an idea of a story for this one, so, you know, we've already moved on from my first scrambling novel into something that does resemble plot. So the setting is a post-apocalyptic world, very much like the Solis Invicti series, and I wanted to see if I could do something with the London Underground, because I thought that would be a really cool setting for a sort of post-apocalyptic vampire story, because they're underground, so you know, that's just the perfect place to have your base, because at this stage of the story, in my Solis Invicti series, my vampires aren't light sensitive, but they were when I was writing this graphic novel. So I thought that lent itself very well. And I liked the idea of hierarchy. So already I had this sort of king and deputies and a military sort of setup, in the same way that the Solis Invicti series uses those ideas of hierarchy to introduce tension in the relationships in the series. So the story of the graphic novel was following a kind of king vampire and his deputy on the one hand, and on the other hand, a girl who was not a vampire but had porphyria, which I thought would be an interesting sort of vampire middle ground. So the vampires need the blood to drink and survive in the normal kind of vampire way of things, and the porphyriac needed blood in order to get heme in order not to die. So I thought that would be 2 interesting sides of the same coin. As I said, only got 7 pages in, so not brilliant, But a lot of the structure and a lot of the characters that I created in that initial graphic novel that went nowhere ended up informing a lot of the Solis Invicti series. So I wanted to share a little bit of it with you. So this is the cover. As you can see, I was already quite heavily on the Latin because I called it tenebrae, which is the Latin for shadows. And the two characters on the cover here, the one on the right is the sort of deputy vampire who for some reason looks a bit like a girl and has ridiculous cheekbones. And then the person on the left is the female main character who was the porphyriac, who for some reason has massive knockers. I think that's just, you know, comic book convention, isn't it? I'd like to think that I might draw her a bit differently these days, but there we are. That was going to be my cover. You might also notice that up in the top right hand corner there is my tattoo, which I don't know why I incorporated that in the cover, but there it is. I've got that tattoo on my chest here. I think it was sort of going to be a kind of signature. But anyway, so that was my cover with my, as you can see, slightly inadequate drawing. And then this is the setting. So this was one of the opening shots of the graphic novel. This is just a bit of the street with a metro station, as you see. I clearly decided not to call it the London Underground. I don't know why that was. It might simply have been that metro is easier and shorter to write out. So that's the sort of post-apocalyptic setting that we're dealing with. And then this is inside the metro station where this very brooding figure is dragging this dead person, which is all very gory and lots of candles and a rather impractical setting. You've got to think that maybe they got a little bit chilly in the evenings. But anyway, that was the basic setting. And then we come to our main characters, who actually, I think, have pretty much turned into my main characters from the Solis Invicti series, which was not my intention, and I didn't actually realise until I got this graphic novel back out a few years ago and started flicking through it. But this is my king character, who, whilst still looking a bit girly, I really can't seem to draw men. So you might be able to tell why my graphic artist career took a rather abrupt halt. But anyway, this is the king character who looks a little bit like Sol turned out in the Solis Invicti series. So that, I think, is where he came from. And then this chap, who again looks massively like a girl, is Drew, who was his kind of deputy. Although, of course, in this they've got completely different names. But that was, I think, roughly how I saw him in my head, although not quite as androgynous as I've drawn him. And then finally, this is the female character, who was sort of my inspiration for Emmy. And as you can see, she says fuck a lot, which Emmy does in the Solis Invicti series. So there we go. So that was where the sort of core idea for the series came from, I think. And then from that point onwards, it sort of unconsciously morphed into something different. So I'd always struggled with the idea of vampires not being able to go out in the sunlight, because it's really irritating from a plot perspective, particularly if you want them to be mixing with humans. And I definitely didn't want to do a sparkly vampire, Twilight-ish thing, because I wanted there to be some sort of daylight association, but I didn't want it to be quite so inconsequential. So I decided I'd make two different kinds of vampire-ish creatures, one of whom ended up being the Silver, who are the basic vampires who can go out in daylight, and the other of whom are the Weepers, who are more like zombies, but have a reaction to sunlight. So when they are out in the sunlight, it makes their eyes bleed and it eventually turns them blind. So the idea was that you've got a sort of super race of Silver, of vampires, who have all of the sort of normal vampire powers but can go out in daylight. And then you've got still that element of things being scarier in the darkness, because that's when the zombies come out. So that was my world, really, and adding in a zombie-ish element meant that, of course, I could go into the whole world of viruses and infection and the sort of horde aspect that you get with zombie stories, which I really enjoyed, and ended up being my apocalyptic event that really kicks off the Solis Invicti series. So I think if I were describing the Solis Invicti series, I'd say it's a paranormal vampire romance that has a love triangle, but in the background of that, it's also a zombie apocalypse story. So it's the two mashed together in a what I like to think is an exciting and unpredictable mix-up of the two. So I hope you've enjoyed taking a little bit of a step back in time with me and learning why I didn't become a graphic artist, much to everyone's relief. And don't forget that if you would like to ask me anything about my books or anything about my writing, then you can tweet me questions with the hashtag #AskJosie-Jaffrey, and I'll answer them on my Sunday vlog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.